Welcome to the Deep Dive, the show where we take your stack of sources and transform them into focused, practical knowledge.
Our mission today is, well, it's pretty central to global communication.
And frankly, to the career trajectory of millions. We are diving deep into English, the world's current lingua franca. And we're charting how it is rapidly transforming, not just, linguistically, but culturally as well.
It's such a vital exploration because English today it's less a fixed language that's owned by native speakers.
Right.
And it's much more of a constantly mutating global tool. So if you are learning, using, or working in English, you really need to understand the new rules of the game.
And that's what we're going to do. We're going to trace the historical forces that led to its dominance, zero in on the specific linguistic shortcuts that can maximize your effort.
And, maybe most importantly, explore why cultural intelligence might actually be a more critical factor for success than, say, perfect grammar.
The sources you've gathered for this are absolutely fantastic. I mean, they span everything from the theological upheavals that broke Latin's power.
All the way to modern internet slang.
Exactly. Things like prepone. So this deep dive is customized for you, the savvy learner. And you're seeking not just a summary, but those profound aha moments.
Those are the knowledge nuggets that give you a real practical edge.
We want to show you that while knowledge of vocabulary and grammar is, of course, key,
It is.
context, adaptability, and emotional resilience, what we're going to call cultural intelligence, those are the true forces.
That's what unlocks the application of that knowledge in the messy, exciting reality of the global workplace. And to understand where we are, we have to first understand how we got here.
Let's start with the historical foundation.
Let's do it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Before English became, the language of Hollywood and the internet, it had to overcome centuries of linguistic precedent.
Right. The need for an international language has always been there. But the language itself, that changes based on who holds the cultural and political power at the time.
And that's a crucial distinction. For over 1,300 years, English, or its predecessors, was nowhere near being a global currency.
Not even on the map. Latin was the unquestioned intellectual and religious lingua franca of the entire Western world.
It's so surprising just how deeply embedded Latin was. It wasn't just for church services, was it?
Oh, no. It was the language of law, medicine, philosophy.
I was reading about Sir Thomas More's famous book, Utopia, published way back in 1629. And even though the publisher was based in Amsterdam, it was written in Latin.
Of course. If you wanted to be read across Europe, if you wanted your ideas to travel, you wrote in Latin. There was no other choice.
It was the global code for the educated elite.
Absolutely. And critically, it was the working language of Renaissance scientists. If you were communicating a new astronomical finding or a medical discovery, you defaulted to Latin.
It ensured you could reach your peers in Paris, Padua, and London all at the same time.
It transcended all those regional dialects and, the nascent national boundaries in a way that nothing else could at the time.
So what broke that 1,300-year hold? How did it finally start to crumble?
It was a shift in power and, perhaps surprisingly, a huge shift in theology.
The Reformation.
The hold of Latin began to truly fracture with the rise of national cultures and, yes, the Protestant Reformation. People started demanding religious text and debate be delivered in their local vernacular languages.
Martin Luther translating the Bible into German is a huge example.
A perfect example. And that didn't just impact religion, it effectively standardized the German language itself.
And this movement had a direct impact on English standardization.
Yeah.
Right? It helped turn what was basically a collection of regional dialects into a unified national tool.
It did. I mean, think about the monumental task of creating the King James Bible, first published in 1611.
That work was revolutionary.
It was. The demand for religious, legal, and eventually commercial texts in the vernacular. It drove this intense standardization in spelling, punctuation, grammar.
And the printing press just poured fuel on that fire.
Massively. It ensured that, for the first time in history, millions of people were seeing the exact same words spelled the exact same way.
And this made local languages like English a tremendously powerful tool for unification.
Suddenly, the government, the church, schools, they could ask the diverse peoples of the British Isles to communicate using a single codified writing system.
So this internal standardization was essential. It sort of prepared English for its next big phase.
Its global export phase, which really happened in two distinct waves. The first was that global spread via empire and migration, starting roughly in the 17th century.
So that's the soldiers, sailors, merchants, colonizers.
Exactly. All traveling to and settling across the globe. English became a necessity for administration and commerce in these huge parts of the world.
North America, Australia.
Parts of Africa and Asia. I mean, it was spoken virtually everywhere that didn't retain its independence or fall under the colonial influence of, say, the Spanish, Portuguese, French, or Dutch.
So it established English as the baseline language in trade hubs and administrative centers.
And gave it a massive initial geographic footprint.
It's so interesting that even while this was happening and well into the 20th century, there was still this utopian dream of a neutral international language.
Oh, yes. Especially after the devastation of 2 world wars.
You see the creation of bodies like the League of Nations and later the UN, and it just reignites that desire for a truly universal non-political tongue.
And people tried. There were attempts to create these planned languages, most notably Esperanto.
Which was, by all accounts, elegantly designed. Easy to learn, simple grammar.
But language adoption is never about elegance, is it? It's about power and necessity.
The sources were clear that politicians and diplomats they didn't adopt it.
It couldn't overcome the cultural momentum of the established languages. So English naturally emerged as the winner.
It benefited from the legacy of the British Empire, which had already set up all this infrastructure.
But the global 20th century acceleration that was fueled almost entirely by the rise of the United States.
As the dominant global military, economic, and cultural power.
And that's when technology and pop culture completely took over as the engine of spread.
So it wasn't linguistic conquest via military force anymore.
No, this was diffusion through desire. Think about the progression. Phones, radio, television, recorded music, CDs, and then the internet.
Each technological leap enabled instantaneous global access to English language content.
Right. Before, you had to move to the UK or the US to really immerse yourself. Suddenly, the immersion came directly to you.
And it wasn't technical manuals that hooked people, it was the culture. I was really surprised by the emphasis the sources placed on music and film.
It was huge. Millions of young people grew to love the sound and the rhythm of English-speaking bands. And Hollywood films, even when they were subtitled, allowed non-English speakers to engage with and imitate these iconic figures like James Cagney or Marilyn Monroe.
They wanted the language that carried that culture.
And that drove the global spread of phrases that sound so simple to us now, like cool or go to it.
So if we connect this all back to the beginning, what's truly fascinating is that English became the lingua franca organically.
Yes, through market forces, cultural appeal, economic and military power.
Not through some directed government mandate, like the initial push for standardized national languages centuries before.
And that organic growth is the source of both its strength and its current wild mutation, which we're about to get into.
But it also raises a modern challenge, doesn't it? The challenge of sustainability.
We have to remember that Latin's dominance also seemed absolute for over a millennium. Nothing lasts forever.
So the question is English's dominance sustainable in the long term?
Precisely. The sources noted that, maybe 100 years from now, with big shifts in global demographics and economic power, the world population might come to value the subtleties and beauty of Mandarin or Cantonese.
Or a completely new language.
Or a completely new language. But for now, English holds the title, and its power is generating this incredible linguistic chaos.
The good kind of chaos.
Exactly, the good kind of chaos.
That idea of good chaos leads us perfectly into our second section, because this is where it gets really, really interesting. The sheer scale of global spread means English isn't just being learned.
No, it is constantly giving birth to new, distinct languages.
All because of time, geographical separation, and intensive linguistic contact.
We are witnessing linguistic procreation in real time. And to understand this, we have to clearly define pidgins and creoles, because they're the foundation of this modern evolution.
Okay, let's start with pidgin. I was so fascinated to learn that the word pidgin itself comes from a modified pronunciation of the word business.
In a Chinese pidgin English used for trade in the 19th century.
It just perfectly encapsulates its function.
It does. A pidgin is a simplified communication tool created for trade or commerce between groups who don't share a common language.
It simplifies the grammar, often borrowing most of it from one parent language.
And then adapts vocabulary from others. But critically, It is not anyone's native language. It's strictly a contact language.
And the transition to a Creole is what fundamentally changes everything.
A Creole is the fully elaborated, all-purpose language that develops when children start growing up speaking that pidgin natively as their mother tongue.
Once a language has native speakers, it has to get more complex.
It must develop the full grammatical scaffolding needed for everyday life, for complex thought, for emotional expression. This is why Creoles truly have more than one parent.
And some linguists even argue this is how English itself developed, that modern English is a kind of Creole descendant of Anglo-Saxon.
Having been so profoundly influenced by Old Norse from the Vikings and then Norman French after 1066.
It's a compelling argument. It just reinforces the idea that this mutation is natural.
And we see this process repeating all over the world today. I mean, look at TikTok Paisan, which is an official language of Papua New Guinea.
It started as an English-based pidgin, but it rapidly integrated German, Portuguese, and a bunch of Austronesian languages. It's way more than a trade language now.
Oh, indeed. It boasts about 120,000 native speakers and up to 4 million second language speakers, which just shows how deeply entrenched it is.
And linguistically, it operates on a much simpler phonology, right? Fewer vowels and consonants.
Yes, but the most striking feature is its reliance on word strings over what we would call inflecting grammar.
Can you give us an example of what that simplification looks like in practice?
Sure. Where standard English would use grammatical inflections, like adding ed for the past tense, or using complex prepositions, TikTok Paisan often just links simple words together to get the meaning across.
So it's a different way of building meaning.
A completely different structure. And the sources highlighted how translating complex documents like, say, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights into TikTok Paisan.
It makes it completely non-mutually intelligible with standard English.
Exactly. You have to be a speaker of TikTok Paisan to understand it. It's its own language.
Now, contrast that with Titkern, which is a language born not from trade, but from radical isolation.
After the infamous Mutiny on the Bounty in 1789,
Right.
Pitcairn is a perfect case study in linguistic mixture under duress. You had the mutineers, who were a rough mix of poorly educated sailors from different parts of the British Isles,
And they intermarried with Tahitian women.
fusing their various English dialects with Tahitian language structures and vocabulary.
So the resulting language is clearly descended from English, but it's completely unique. That example from the sources, about ye Gwen, for where you going?
Or I say Gwenanawe for I'm going swimming. The syntax and the phonetics are just radically altered.
It's a fascinating, isolated language.
But unfortunately, with fewer than 500 speakers left, mainly because of modern mobility and outmigration, it is considered endangered.
Now moving back to the Americas, we find Gula, or Geechee, spoken along the southeast coast of the U.S.
Particularly in the Sea Islands of South Carolina and Georgia, Gullah is a vital U.S. Creole spoken by around 250,000 people.
It's a heritage language.
A direct result of enslaved Africans from West Africa developing a contact language that fused English vocabulary with the grammatical and phonetic structures of languages like Mende and Wolof.
Its preservation is so culturally significant.
It is. And the power of Gula can be seen even in common American language.
The spiritual kumbaya.
Kumbaya, which means come by here, asking for divine assistance, comes directly from Gula. It shows how these Creoles feed back into the wider linguistic pool.
And we see similar patterns in Suriname with Sranan-Tongo.
Spoken by about 400,000 people, it has an English core, but pulls heavily from Portuguese, Dutch, and West African languages. It's a real story of linguistic resilience.
The Dutch colonial education system actively discouraged it.
They did, yet it gained considerable status after Suriname gained independence in the mid-70s.
And finally, we have to look at Singlish, or Singaporean English.
Which is maybe the most dynamic and contentious example in the modern world.
It's immensely popular in Singapore, despite, intermittent efforts by the government to promote standard English instead.
And what makes it so fascinating is how Chinese dialects provide so much of the grammatical structure, the scaffolding.
And then the vocabulary is pulled from English, Malay, and Tamil.
It is truly the native tongue for many young Singaporeans.
And the range of Singlish is startling. It goes from forms that are pretty close to standard English to those that are completely mutually unintelligible for an outsider.
That example, Walau, the movie Damsian.
Right.
It's not just using a few borrowed words, it's using walau as an exclamation and sian as a specific term for being bored or unenthusiastic. That's deep structural, lexical innovation.
And this brings us right up to the internet age.
Because the internet is acting as this massive linguistic incubator, accelerating this whole process of mutation far beyond the speed of isolation we saw with Pitcairn.
That's the key, isn't it? The speed. Non-native speakers now vastly outnumber native speakers globally.
And they're increasingly communicating with each other online.
So English is being used as a tool by people who don't necessarily feel bound by all the traditional standards.
Exactly. Naomi Barron, a professor of linguistics, she points out that the internet fundamentally challenges traditional linguistic standards because what really matters is efficiency.
If the message is clear, grammar and spelling become secondary.
And users don't have to worry about their accent either, which is a huge psychological hurdle just removed from the equation.
So as a result, we see these internet Englishes, these commingling languages, just expanding at an incredible rate.
We have Hinglish, so Hindi, Urdu, Punjabi, English. We have Spanglish. We have Konglish.
And Hinglish is maybe the most advanced and fascinating.
It's now so widespread in India, a country with a massive English-speaking population, that it's even being taught to diplomats in the UK as a necessity for modern communication.
And these variations, they generate these incredibly specific lexical innovations that fill gaps in standard English.
Hinglish gives us terms like co-brother, meaning a brother-in-law.
Or Eve teasing for sexual harassment. It provides these highly localized, necessary concepts.
And my favorite example that you mentioned earlier, the creation of prepone. We have postpone to move something later. But if you want to bring a meeting forward in time, there is no single, simple, standard English verb for that.
Prepone is linguistically elegant, and it immediately fills a practical need, especially in fast-paced professional communication.
And this trend continues globally. In Konglish, the term skinship refers to intimate physical contact, like hand-holding or casual caressing.
In standard English, that idea requires a much longer description.
And the Singlish term, blur, meaning confused or slow to catch on, it provides a rapid, descriptive shorthand.
So what this entire section really shows is that English isn't just conquering other languages and pushing them out.
It's the opposite. Other languages are actively pushing their way into English, forcing it to adapt and evolve into something far richer and much more diverse.
Which brings us to the practical application for you, the learner. If English is morphing into hundreds of Englishes and the standard rules are bending,
it raises a crucial practical question.
How much English do you actually need to function successfully, and where should you focus your limited study time?
Well, we have to immediately address what we can call the word count conundrum.
Right. When you look at the Oxford English Dictionary listing 171,146 words in use, plus nearly 48,000 obsolete words, that number is just paralyzing.
No human has access to all that vocabulary, not even native speakers.
So we need a realistic benchmark. Native speakers typically possess an active and passive vocabulary of about 15,000 to 20,000 word families, or lemmas.
And to be clear, a lemma is the base form of a word. It groups together all its grammatical inflections. So read, reading, reads, reader, readership. They might all fall under the lemma read.
And that 15,000 to 20,000 figure, that represents true fluency and comprehension.
However, the data on language learners shows a major challenge, what we can call the learner plateau.
Studies repeatedly show that students studying a second language traditionally struggle to move beyond knowing, 2,000 to 3,000 words.
Even after years of diligent study.
That example from Taiwan, where half the students failed to master even the 1,000 most frequently used words after 9 years, it's shocking. It shows a major flaw in traditional teaching methods.
The breakthrough really comes from understanding word frequency, thanks to extensive linguistic research. You do not need the entire vocabulary to achieve high comprehension.
You just need to focus on the words that carry the structural load of the language.
So here's the shortcut to comprehension that we uncovered in the sources.
By focusing intensely on the 800 to 1,000 most frequent lemmas, you can unlock understanding of roughly 75% of the language as it is spoken in normal day-to-day conversation.
That is an immense return on investment.
Why does that work so well?
It works because these high-frequency words include all the core function words, articles, prepositions, conjunctions, and the most common verbs, which carry the grammatical skeleton of the sentence. Without them, you can't construct or understand basic English.
Okay, and if you push slightly further, say, to understand dialogue in film or television,
which often uses more expansive vocabulary and idioms, you need to know the 3,000 most common lemmas.
Or finally, if your goal is full literacy, to read novels, complex BBC articles, or broadsheet newspapers.
Then you need to aim for a vocabulary base of 8,000 to 9,000 lemmas. That range is what's required to handle the diverse non-technical vocabulary used in those complex written texts.
But that core 800 to 1,000 words, that's your immediate ticket to functioning globally.
Absolutely.
So let's move past the basics and focus on some specific linguistic tools and concepts that take a learner from functional to sophisticated, like we promised our audience. We can probably skip defining basic words and focus on the advanced stuff.
Right. We can draw those deeper insights from the scientific reporting we reviewed, like that article on the solar orbiter spacecraft viewing the sun's south pole. That kind of high-level text requires specific advanced vocabulary.
For instance, the use of the verb enable is much more sophisticated than just saying allow or make possible.
The article noted the view would enable scientists to better understand the sun. It implies providing the necessary means or even the authority to do something.
We also saw these really richly descriptive terms like shimmering for bright and sparkly and searing for extremely hot to describe the sun's atmosphere.
And those words aren't just learned from a list. They have to be understood within the context of scientific observation to be used correctly.
And let's not forget the metaphorical concepts, like Professor Lucy Green's quote about finding the missing piece of the puzzle.
Which isn't literal, of course.
No, it's a sophisticated idiom for solving a complex problem or finally finding that crucial piece of information needed for a breakthrough. True fluency requires mastering these conceptual metaphors.
So moving on to grammar, let's dive into those deep dive nuggets that really separate the intermediate learner from the advanced user. Let's start with superlatives.
The article referred to the images as the closest and most detailed ever taken. The rule requiring the article with superlatives is standard.
But the nuance is in the efficiency.
That's the subtlety I was looking for. The article chose not to repeat the before most detailed.
Right. And while it's not incorrect to say the closest and the most detailed, omitting the seconds to text makes the text flow more elegantly. It's a hallmark of sophisticated written English, especially in lists.
Then we have possessives, like the sun's south pole.
In natural spoken English, especially with that doubles as sound, native speakers tend to reduce the sound, pronouncing only one ears. It's a very fast, efficient elision that non-native speakers often overlook, but have to master for natural speech.
And finally, the passive voice. The sources were very clear that understanding the passive voice is essential, especially in scientific and academic reporting.
This is where the actor is less important than the object or the result of the action.
We saw several examples. The view has been filmed by the spacecraft.
Or videos and images have been sent back to Earth. In both cases, the view and the images are the focus. They're receiving the action. The passive voice is favored in scientific context because it promotes objectivity.
It's a convention. The scientist's involvement is secondary to the observable phenomena.
So, using the passive voice reinforces that required objectivity. If you were writing a lab report, you wouldn't write, "I mixed the chemicals."
You would write, "The chemicals were mixed." The use of the passive voice subtly removes the actor, making the process itself the central focus.
Precisely. It shifts the emphasis away from who did it to what happened. And mastering why certain structural choices are made in English, like choosing the passive for objectivity, is arguably more important than just knowing how to conjugate the verb.
And one final quick nugget on emphatic language. That phrase, first ever.
Right. Humankind's first ever views.
Although first already implies that something has never occurred before, adding ever just emphasizes the sheer historical uniqueness of the event.
It's a rhetorical device. It's used to underscore achievement and maximize impact.
So all these elements, the vocabulary, the grammar, the rhetorical choices, they combine to create the sophisticated English necessary to operate at the highest level.
But as we're about to see, words alone are often not enough.
And that's a perfect lead-in to our next big question. This raises an important point. We've optimized our vocabulary and grammar, but for global professionals, is cultural knowledge actually more critical than linguistic fluency?
And the sources suggest that for achieving professional success, the answer might be yes.
That perspective is really gaining traction because of the sheer scale of global mobility.
Growing numbers of multinational corporations and startups are adopting English as their official company language globally. The sheer volume of people who use English at a functional level, we're talking close to 2 billion, means the default language of international business is already established.
And we see a high tolerance for this trend among younger professionals. The Global Shapers Annual Survey found that 81% of respondents aged 18 to 35 were willing to work abroad.
They prioritize the ability to work and live anywhere.
They just accept that they can survive professionally without achieving deep local language fluency.
Which leads to this pragmatic argument against intensive language study for short assignments. Sri Khazanakurthi, an IT consultant, found that during assignments in places as diverse as Dubai, Singapore, Stockholm, and Brussels, he largely operated and succeeded entirely in English.
His argument is purely based on return on investment. If an assignment is less than 2 years, the time required to achieve true conversational fluency,
The kind that lets you into local social networks.
might be better spent focusing on excelling at work and finding like-minded expats or local hobby clubs.
And David Livermore, a leading author on cultural intelligence, or CQ, he strongly supports this. He states that full fluency is just unnecessary for assignments lasting 5 years or less.
So he argues that the ability to adapt your communication style and understand social norms is often the real differentiator between success and failure.
Absolutely. Which brings us to Livermore's 4 key areas of cultural intelligence, which provide a blueprint for this necessary adaptability.
Okay, what are they?
First, we have drive interest. This is the motivation, the genuine, sustained interest in working in cross-cultural environments. It's the emotional resilience to persevere when things get frustrating.
Second is knowledge. This means understanding cultural similarities and differences. You need to know the rules of the road. What's a fixed custom, what's polite, what's taboo.
Third, and maybe the most complex, is strategy. This is your cognitive capability, the ability to monitor, analyze, and adjust your plans in real time in unfamiliar cultural settings.
So knowing that a Japanese colleague's silence might mean disagreement, not just contemplation, that's a strategic skill.
Exactly. And finally, action. This is the behavioral component, choosing the right verbal and nonverbal behaviors based on the context. Do you need to slow your speech? Do you need to adjust your body language to show respect?
And while all 4 are necessary, Livermore's research emphasized that the ability to cope with, adjust to, and persevere
Emotional and cognitive resilience.
is the most important of the 4 CQ capabilities for expat success.
If you quit under pressure, no amount of language skill is going to save the assignment.
And this resilience is most tested when you encounter high culture shock. Professor Eero Vara singled out Japan as a classic example where young professionals can experience severe difficulties.
Because of the incredibly fixed codes of conduct?
The list is extensive. Rigid etiquette around bowing. The absolute necessity of saving face and avoiding conflict.
Extreme politeness, respect for silence, notoriously long working hours. If you, as a global professional, lack cultural sensitivity here, your collaboration will almost certainly fail, even if you speak perfect English.
The anecdote about Ryu Miyamoto, a U.S. native living near Osaka, is a great illustration of this kind of adaptation. He described becoming culturally fluent in about 3 years, becoming pretty Japanized.
And his adaptation involved more than just language. He immersed himself in Japanese TV, which taught him cultural codes and humor, and he learned to cook Japanese food.
But the most crucial business move, however, was adopting a traditional Japanese name.
That detail really stood out. When he called people using his American name, he was often met with confusion or dismissal.
But when he called and said, "This is Miyamoto," the barriers just immediately dropped.
It's a profound lesson. The cultural mechanism of acceptance was blocking his competence. Language didn't matter in that moment. Identity and conformity to cultural expectation did.
But then we have the opposite problem. Hidden culture shock.
Which can be even more deceptive. You often find it in nations that score really highly on English proficiency.
The Nordic countries or the Netherlands.
Exactly. They consistently top global English proficiency indexes, so Western expats arrive expecting low adjustment because everyone speaks perfect English.
But as Caroline Werner observed about Sweden, many expats fail to understand the deep, subtle cultural codes.
For example, Swedes often avoid small talk entirely. Topics that are standard conversation starters elsewhere, religion, politics, personal income, are generally taboo.
So expats can speak perfect English and still feel completely isolated.
It's often related to cultural norms like janteloven, the law of Jante, which emphasizes collective humility and avoiding showing off. That cultural preference directly impacts communication style.
And while they're proficient in English, they aren't culturally comfortable in English when they want to really relax.
Or engage in deep, honest professional discussion. Vara's research confirms that even highly competent Swedes feel not 100% comfortable using English to relax or form deep bonds.
And this is where the lack of local language skills creates a professional wall.
Learning Swedish or Danish or Dutch is crucial if you want to access the inner circles, the informal networks, the water cooler conversations, the all-important fika coffee breaks in Sweden.
Those are key to collaboration and professional advancement.
If you're excluded from those informal exchanges, your career just stalls.
So success isn't about complete assimilation.
No, Sima Majub, a professional in Sweden, found she couldn't remove her fiery, expressive Southern European instincts.
It's about acceptance.
Acceptance is the foundation of cultural intelligence. You have to appreciate the differences and learn to deal with them. You don't have to become what you are not, but you must recognize that your behavior has to be modulated to fit the local context.
And on a practical note, local language skills remain vital for anything transactional.
Buying property, dealing with tax codes, handling government paperwork, English won't save you from bureaucracy.
What's fascinating here is that as English transitions from being a national language to this hyper-dynamic global tool, the entire power dynamic has flipped.
And it's putting native speakers at a surprising disadvantage.
The statistics are staggering, really, and indisputable. Non-native English speakers now vastly outnumber native speakers.
With estimates of functional English speakers climbing toward 2 billion, the sheer weight of numbers means that the non-native community now defines how the language is used globally.
And this creates a genuine identity crisis for the traditional native speaker, particularly Americans and Britons.
They often mistakenly assume their English is universally clear and effective.
As Dr. Dominic Watt, a sociolinguistics expert, suggests, the traditional privilege of the mother tongue is dissolving.
Because native speakers haven't had to undergo that intense learning process that non-natives have, they lack the necessary self-awareness.
The sources gave that incredible anecdote about non-native speakers at the European Parliament asking Anglophones to, and I'm quoting here, just speak English like the rest of us do.
It's a hilarious reversal of expected roles, but it highlights the friction caused by the assumed clarity of native speech.
It perfectly captures the cognitive dissonance.
Native speakers often lack any insight into the enormous cognitive load that non-native speakers face when listening, processing, and responding in a second language. That processing effort is tough and tiring, and native speakers are usually the ones making it harder.
So this necessitates a serious native speaker recalibration.
A process Ben Barron, an American working internationally for Zurich Insurance, had to consciously undertake. He realized he had to actively filter and slow down his American speak.
And a critical strategy for him was filtering out jargon and idioms that just don't travel well.
The example of the very regional Southern American saying, "That dog don't hunt," meaning that's probably not a good idea, is perfect.
It's totally opaque to a global audience.
Completely. He also had to consciously eliminate obscure references to baseball or American football.
But managing speed is arguably the most crucial behavioral change.
The research is so clear on this. Native speakers average around 250 words per minute.
But the average intermediate non-native speaker is only comfortable processing information at about 150 words per minute.
That 100 word per minute difference creates massive comprehension gaps.
Learning to speak at that slower, steadier rate is an emotional and behavioral competence that takes significant time.
Often 6 to 12 months to truly master. Trainers counsel native speakers to record themselves regularly and practice controlling their pace, especially when they're excited or under pressure.
Articulation is another factor in intelligibility.
Native speakers are advised to improve clarity by non-contracting their speech. Saying and writing cannot or do not instead of can't or don't makes the core verbs far easier to identify.
Contractions are particularly difficult for non-natives.
They obscure the root verb and complicate the stress patterns of the sentence. And similarly, avoiding informal slurred contractions like "ul" for "I will" dramatically improves global intelligibility. It's about making concessions for the sake of universal clarity.
And finally, there's the issue of conversational dominance.
Monolinguals, whether through speed or just unconscious privilege, often unwittingly dominate conversations.
And that marginalizes non-native speakers who require that processing time.
The simplest and most powerful behavioral solution, according to one training provider, is for native speakers to deliberately shut up and ask more questions.
It forces the native speaker to step back.
It provides necessary thinking and translation space for the non-native speaker, and it ensures that participation is equalized. It shifts the focus from native comfort to mutual effectiveness.
So, if the native speaker disadvantage is real, and the shift is toward maximizing efficiency over correctness, Where is the linguistic landscape headed?
Well, Robert Gibson, a language expert, noted that the trend is moving decisively away from conforming to a single standard English, British, or American.
And toward accepting and utilizing many different context-dependent standards.
It's not one English anymore, it's many Englishes used for specific global tasks.
Which implies that the future of the language will be defined by its users, the billions of non-native speakers, not its historical owners.
And linguists predict that within a decade, English will absolutely dominate the internet. But the forms it takes, in terms of grammar, vocabulary, and phonetic realization, will be vastly different from what is traditionally recognized or taught in classrooms.
The measure of success will be entirely defined by mutual understanding,
not conformity to historical standards.
This deep dive has been so illuminating. We've charted this incredible course from the decline of Latin and the rise of nationalism through the birth of Creoles and the acceleration of internet Englishes.
We found the critical vocabulary shortcuts for learners and highlighted the surprising dominant role of cultural intelligence in global professional success.
So our final synthesis for you, the learner, is this. The shift from English as a native-owned language to a global lingua franca means that efficiency, clarity, and mutual understanding now decisively trump traditional notions of correctness.
Your success is measured entirely by whether you can effectively communicate, not whether you can perfectly conform to a regional standard.
You now hold the crucial linguistic shortcut. Focusing on just 800 to 1,000 high-frequency words can get you 75% of the way in spoken English.
And you know exactly where to focus your advanced grammar study on structures like the passive voice and sophisticated vocabulary.
But here is the provocative thought for you to carry forward. You've mastered the linguistic basics.
But what piece of your cultural puzzle are you currently missing in terms of drive, strategy, or action that is preventing you from achieving a 100% connection and cooperation with the people you communicate with every single day?
Maybe the next adjustment you need to make isn't to your vocabulary,
but to your patience, your strategy, or your humility. That is your next deep dive.